my friends are simps.
So at this point, it's been about 10 months since I got this wee beauty, the OPZ, and I know that lots of people have had varying experiences with both the OPZ and also teenage engineering more generally. However, I have to say that after about a year, I've not really had any issues, and I really like this device. Not only is it actually genuinely portable in the sense that it's small, but it also doesn't have any sticky out bits like the OP1, so I'm not worried about it getting damaged. But also the process of making music with this, you know, how it's got patterns and sequences and built-in effects and everything, just makes it a real pleasure to use. And often I can come up with things that really do scratch that itch of wanting to make music and are particularly satisfying when I'm on the go. Now, one of the things that kind of stands out about the OPZ as one of its main strengths is that it's not just, you know, sequences and stuff in here, but similar to pocket operators and how they work. You have your patterns and sequences, but you're also kind of encouraged to mess about with them, to throw in different effects on a step or, you know, put in drop-in effects, to change things up as you go, and that makes it a really kind of performative instrument. However, that strength is also kind of one of its weaknesses in the sense that it doesn't really necessarily lend itself very well to taking the music out of the OPZ and kind of, you know, progressing it into something a bit more professional. And if you know anything about the OPZ, you'll know that there isn't any way built into either the OPZ or the companion apps which makes it easy or really possible to take multi-track recordings. And that's a shame because it does limit the kind of use cases for me, and it's been the kind of main downside and the reason why this hasn't been getting constantly used, basically. Now, recently I discovered that some very clever person had put together an application in Python which lets you multi-track record your patterns and sequences from the OPZ, and this, if it works the way that I hope it does, will be incredible because it will mean that you can take the kind of core parts of your sequences and then turn them into songs in your DAW and process the kick drums separately, maybe put it through effects and all of that. And that will turn the OPZ into, you know, something far greater and more powerful than it is already, and it could actually be the reason that I fall back in love with this thing. Now, I have to confess, I have tried out the app, and I'm going to show you how it works in practice in a second. And in my various experiments, what I've found is that it does actually work really well. However, you have to be aware that because part of the kind of character of the OPZ comes in the punch-in effects, you're not going to be able to replicate that in the same way. You can, of course, kind of record a pattern and play about with it, but you won't have the same level of variation that you would if you were recording a full song with, you know, multiple effects actually being performed. So be aware of that. Another thing to say is that when I was recording some tracks or some projects where, you know, there was lots of kind of reverb or delay or something, even though there were ways to kind of get around that, it did mean that the stems didn't always necessarily line up perfectly because you didn't always have the tail that you might on the OPZ itself. So it does take a wee bit of jiggering about within the, you know, your DAW if you want to put all the stems together as loops. However, it actually works fairly well. So I'm going to show you the app. You can download it on Mac and also Windows. It's written in Python, as I said, so it should theoretically be cross-platform. However, I'm not going to tell you how to install it. You can go find it on GitHub. The link will be below. But I'm going to show you how it actually works in terms of the GUI, because if you've got an OPZ, then I think this is kind of a killer feature, which, you know, unlocks the power of this beast. I have connected up the OPZ to my computer at this point, and I've very deliberately opened it up at the OPZ application for a specific reason, and that is because if you want to use Underbridge to export your stems or your patterns or whatever it might be and have them all correctly in time, you need to know what the tempo of the project on your OPZ actually is, and there's a couple of different ways you can figure this out. I believe that you can interpret a series of kind of cryptic flashing LEDs if you wanted to go down that route. However, you can also just load up the OPZ software, which you may as well do since you're, you know, on the computer anyway to record your stems. Go into the tempo page, and as you can see here, in this particular project, I have selected the very classic, but perhaps slightly unimaginative tempo of 120 BPM. Anyway, now that I know what the tempo of my project actually is, I can load up Underbridge, and as you can see here, I've already done that earlier to make things a bit smoother. Unfortunately, you can see my favourite Japanese band in the background there, Massive the Fermenting Dregs. That is because I can't resize this window, which is pretty annoying, but I guess that's one of the limitations of working in Python and all that kind of stuff. What we want to do now is we want to type in a name for our export. So let's see, maybe Freedom for Scotland. Yes, that seems appropriate. And next we want to put in the BPM that we figured out from the app, 120. You don't want to type BPM, you just type the number. Now there's a couple of different ways you can use this, and it's kind of important to understand the main differences between them. The first one is project mode, and in project mode essentially you are able to export multiple different patterns from a project. So let's say you have project number 1, and in that project you've got 10 patterns, then you would set it to 10 patterns. But the important thing to note is that you need to activate or load the project in question onto your OPZ. So you load up the project, you select the number of patterns from that project that you want to record. You don't have to record all 10, you could record just the first 4. But also, I believe, let's say you only wanted to record from 4 to 8, then you would load up project 1, pattern 4, select 4 patterns, and in theory that should record pattern 4, 5, 6, 7, or whatever it might be. Now the other way that you can record the patterns from your OPZ, click on pattern, and this is single pattern export mode. And in this what you do is you load up your project, you load up the particular pattern that you want to export, and then it will just save the individual pattern. Now there's a bunch of other modifiers and options in here. The important ones up here are the number of bars, and this allows you to specify the maximum number of bars that any one pattern in your project might use. So let's say, for example, you have a whole bunch of different tracks that are just using, say, 1 bar, but then some of your tracks are using 2 or 3 or 4, then you want to make sure that you're recording patterns long enough in order to capture all of the variations within that pattern. So you can select the number of bars here, and for our purposes I'm leaving it on 1 because it will make it a lot quicker. Now this section, extra seconds, allows you to record essentially the tail of the pattern. So if there's reverb or whatever, you can record a bunch of extra seconds to try and capture that. In theory, I haven't quite been able to figure out how this works just yet, but in theory you can do it. Now down here, there's a bunch of things you can exclude from the track recording. For example, you can exclude the different effects sends, which is useful if you don't want to record, the reverb or the delay or whatever it might be, so that it's easier to, line up your patterns in Logic, as I was kind of talking about earlier. You can also exclude things like the tape and also the kind of perform track, which is the effects, and any module, modifiers, etc. And so that's pretty useful because it means you can get much drier tracks and manipulate them differently later. So once we've got all that sorted, we hit set parameter. That will lock in the BPM. We then have to choose the directory, and I might have to hide this because I don't want you to see all of the folders on my computer. Anyway, you select your directory set, and then once I hit record, in theory what this should do is just record a single pattern with each individual track. So hopefully if I do that, it'll work. OPZ found. You can hear the OPZ playing, I'm sure. And it's going to record each of the tracks. Now the important thing to note whilst this is doing this is that you can see that it's doing it in real time, and so if you have a project that's got 10 patterns, then you have to be aware that it's going to go through each individual track, and it will take quite a while to do. This is good because it's much quicker and more efficient than doing it yourself manually. However, it is going to, it's not the shortest process in the world, so be aware of that when you're coming to export your patterns. So this seems to have done what it's meant to do, and the end result will be something like this, which I did earlier. You can see that each individual pattern is exported as a different number, and you can get the individual tracks as WAV files. Now I've pulled up Logic here so you can see what it looks like once you drag in your various patterns, and you can then do all of the various things that you would do in a DAW, like, you know, mix them and, you know, apply effects and all that kind of thing, cut and paste bits, and it actually seems to work fairly well. And I'll give you a wee quick preview of the project that I've just kind of recorded, although obviously I did this part slightly earlier. So there you have it. It actually works really nicely, and I know that I was clipping the output there, but that was partly just so I could let you hear it. So don't give me any comments about redlining, because redlining is headlining and all that kind of thing. Anyway, this application opens up the OPZ in, you know, to such a great degree that I feel like this is what I've been waiting for to unlock the possibilities of the OPZ, and I'm actually really excited about it. I hope that other OPZ users will also be excited about it. Go download it from GitHub. Say thank you to the person who made it, because this is excellent. Until next time, please leave all of your comments with adulating praise below so that I can become the YouTube celebrity that I'm clearly destined to be. Thank you and goodbye.